The career path to the Boston Symphony Orchestra is never an easy one, but frequently the path takes a lot more twists and turns than one might suppose. Former BSO principal horn Charles Kowalowski was educated primarily as an experimental physicist, and if you read about Burton Fine, you'll see that he has a doctoral degree in chemistry. But Burton Fine's foray in chemistry was actually a detour on the initial path of a music career.
I was trained as a violinist. I studied violin with Galamian for 5 years. I got out of music into chemistry for a variety of reasons, some usual, some not usual. And I worked as a chemist. I went through graduate school. I did undergraduate University of Pennsylvania. I did graduate school Illinois Tech. I also had a doctorate, and I worked for over 8 years for the NACA labs in Cleveland, which became part of NASA. And then it was clear from the earliest days that I was better off playing music than trying to work in science. And at the earliest practical opportunity, I tried to get out of science and into music. I was doing fairly well as a scientist, and the story I like to tell is that I was doing so well in science I could only afford to start at the top in music. So I auditioned for the BSO.
And the first opportunity was as a violinist, and so you were hired as a violinist.
I was hired as a violinist, yes.
Were you studying viola all at the time?
You pick up the viola. Violinists can pick up the viola. It's a chance to double your money, double your fun kind of thing. You make yourself more desirable. One learns with a decent theory program. You can somehow pick up enough alto clef to play it. The adjustments from violin to viola are significant, but people do them. The number of successful, prominent, highly thought of violists out there who never took a viola lesson in their life is large. And that's how you do it. You wait for the opportunity.
And so you were playing in the violin section when the opportunity principal viola came up, and there it was. You got the job.
Well, there it was. Of course, I had no intention of auditioning for the viola job. I was just getting back into serious professional music. I figured I had a lot to learn, and the auditions were announced, and Joe Silverstein, who we had played quartets together once, maybe 15, 20 years before in our student days, and I had played viola that night. Picked up a viola somewhere, and he said, "Well, Bert, you're going to join the big parade?" I said, "Of course not. I'm just learning to be an orchestral violinist." He said, "Well, maybe you ought to audition. You advance in this orchestra by auditioning," he said. I said, "Well, I'll think about it." And I took out the viola, which I think I still had, and I played through some things, and I came back real bright-eyed. A few days later, I said, "Joe, you're right. I'm going to take the audition." As I remember, he turned pale, his jaw dropped, and he said very, very softly and honestly, "Try to get as much sound as you can out of the instrument." And that was it.
So, just a season after landing in the Boston Symphony in the second violin section, months after leaving his post as a research chemist, Burton Fine was principal violist of the Boston Symphony. He remained in that distinguished post for 30 years before stepping down in 1994. Within weeks of landing the principal viola chair was the founding of the Boston Symphony Chamber Players, which was really a means of solving an administrative, or more precisely, a personnel problem.
Which is, what do you do with the principal players when they don't go all back to France for the pop season? You can't feed them into the pops because A, they don't want to do it. B, you take away the hard-earned privileges of the pops principals. Pops principals work very hard. The job is a very demanding one. I served, as circumstances were, I served one pop season as principal viola of the Pops, and it was rough work. This music has to be worked up under conditions of rehearsal and performance where it's not easy to really work it seriously. And people like the principal trumpet have this tremendously difficult, burdensome job where they are really featured in the various styles which characterize the Pops.
So Leinsdorf came up with a rather elegant solution, I think.
Well, as music director, it was his solution. He was the administrator that put it into effect. Question of how much initiative came from Silverstein, who had just recently become concertmaster.
Right.
So between the two of them, they set the sub-institution up, as it were.
Burton Fine participated on the very first recording session of the Boston Symphony Chamber Players, October 26, 1964. Aside from the first Leinsdorf season, Burton Fine has participated in the complete tenures of 3 BSO music directors, Eric Leinsdorf, William Steinberg, and Seiji Ozawa. I asked about his impressions of all 3 of them.
I learned to play in an orchestra under Leinsdorf. I learned the basic music, major conductor, major orchestra, with Leinsdorf. I was strongly influenced then by Leinsdorf. Steinberg wasn't here long enough to really matter in that respect. He gave some memorable performances. Elgar II, some Mahler, some Bruckner, big things like that. He had an excellent concept of especially pacing, holding the slow tempos back when they should, moving the faster ones. His favorite saying, or at least the most memorable saying in that respect, was to move the orchestra. He would say, "It must be fließend, otherwise it gets boring." If fließend, of course, means
right. Rushing in German.
It's a word for fast. It's another word for fast. Gently fast. Now, Ozawa, the strongest impression that Ozawa made on me was the first time he conducted BSO as a guest conductor. My first summer in the BSO at Tanglewood, he showed up as guest conductor. I remember one thing on the program was the Hindemith concert music for strings and brass, which had a certain power, a certain direction, a certain drive that I don't remember ever anything that he did later ever equaling. He was justly famous for his exquisite conducting technique. Lehner, one of the violists, used to say when Ozawa conducts, it is difficult to make a mistake. He stressed clarity. He stressed preparation of tempos and tempo changes. He was exceedingly conscientious about that, and he made it very easy to do what he wanted.
It was very early in the term of Seiji Ozawa that this next tale takes place. Perhaps a bit of explanation is in order. Unlike violinists or cellists, there is really very little for solo viola and orchestra. The only true concerto is arguably by William Walton. Even Berlioz's Held in Italy is really an orchestral tone poem with very juicy viola solos thrown in. The most important piece that's in the repertoire is by Mozart, the Symphonia Concertante for violin and viola in E-flat, a key that poses some major challenges for the viola. Oh, and this also is during the time that Joseph Silverstein was concertmaster.
It was in the spring of 1974. I was supposed to do the concertante with Silverstein that summer. I think that was a part of Ozawa's early years with the orchestra. Almost immediately, very clever idea, very sound idea. He gave as many principals as he could some kind of a solo appearance. And so I was going to do concertante with Silverstein at Tanglewood. And one time in March, I guess it was in March of that year, he calls me up and says, "Hey, Bert, Nelsova got sick and canceled for 2 days." It was on a Monday he called me, yes. And he said, "Bert, Nelsova canceled for tomorrow night. You want to do the concertante?" I said, "What does one say at that point?" One says, "Of course, Joe, of course. Tomorrow night," right? I remember I was painting my garage. I put the paintbrushes down and started, and that was the first time I was going to do it at Tanglewood with my instrument, which is peculiarly designed for that, to play it in the original tuning, half a tone tuned up. Of course, I hadn't worked it for a little while, so for the rest of the day, I practiced it with the tuning, and I think Bernard Haitink was conducting, and I went out on stage. I got ready to go. And I went out on stage, and a blast of heat and light hit me. It was televised.
Oh, whoa. Good thing he didn't tell you.
The performance went okay, as good as I'm going to play. I played as well as I'm going to play. But I saw the tape a few years later. I looked like I was about to die as I walked out on the stage and saw the lights.